Focused on the Sermon on the Mount, which you'll find in Matthew chapter 5 through chapter 7. And it's some of the most significant teaching that Jesus offered. And it really is upside down. In fact, the more we get into it, the more I realize how upside down this stuff is, how radical it is, how countercultural. It's part of Jesus' great reversal. He seems to turn things upside down. And today's topic, I think, is going to do that for us once again. It's called, as you've heard, Between You and God, between me and God. So that things wouldn't be for appearance only. They wouldn't be for show. They wouldn't be for how do I look to others in my life. Beyond that, to go deeper than that. I mean, it is countercultural, right? Because there's this phrase that you'll know as soon as I say it, I think, and I hope you do. Well, we see it all over the place. And it's this: appearance is what? Everything. And it's hard not to live your life tied to that. That's how upside down this stuff is. Between you and God, and let it be there. So I realized how hard it is and how my life, I'm challenged in this way. I recently took on a new role at home, and it became clear through a variety of circumstances that I don't know what happens in your house in the morning, but when we had 3 kids, and my wife and I were all going out and rushing, so when we all leave, if we all leave and nobody cleans the kitchen is it's chaos, like it's a mess, and we come back to that, and it kind of caught wind that, hey, it would be nice if whoever was the last person leaving would maybe clean the kitchen before they left. So I thought, oh, there's a few days a week where that's me, and I can do this. I was starting to inspire myself. I was like, I can clean the kitchen and make a big difference in our house. I started to feel really proud and important, actually. And I started to put an S on my shirt. I mean, it wasn't there, but you could see it. Because I know you're thinking, like, you should just clean the kitchen anyway. Why do you need to be told? But that's another story for another day. So I would start walking back into the house at the end of the day, and on a day where I had cleaned the kitchen before I left, and done a mighty fine job, I might add. And I would kind of stroll into the kitchen like this, and look around and say, "Hey, everybody, you see how clean this kitchen is?" And they were like, "Oh, yeah." So I would follow it up with, "Do you know who did that?" Pointing the finger at me, and they want to do something else with their finger. You know what I mean? I should have just left it between me and God. I think that's what Jesus is getting at in this teaching from Matthew chapter 6. Check out verse 1 that takes us into this whole passage we're going to look at today. This is really what this passage is about. This is at the heart of Jesus' teaching in this particular passage that we're looking at. He says to those who are gathered here for the Sermon on the Mount, he says, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them, for if you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven." And then he's going to go on, we're going to go through it. He goes on to name 3 key areas: giving, praying, and fasting. Those are known as the 3 pillars of the Jewish faith. Now, why does Jesus go so hard and so strong in this idea of don't let it be about your appearance around these spiritual things? Don't let it be what other people see. That's not where your reward's going to come from. It's between you and God. Part of the reason is because it's a bit of a counterattack, if you will, to the Pharisees. The Pharisees at the time were a group of very faithful Jews, but they were very strict on the law. And in fact, so strict on the law that they had a tendency to look down upon those who didn't live to the letter of the law in the same kind of way, and sort of segregate people into who's more spiritually mature, who's maybe more holy or even closer to God. And so Jesus, that's what he's trying to counterattack here. He's trying to battle that. It happens today too, doesn't it, when you really stop to think about it? You can easily look at what others do and rate them or rank them or judge in some ways. I think, in our church we try to break through some of that stuff. But one of them, I think, over the time has been, what do you wear to church? There's people out there, for sure, I know, who wonder what you have to wear to church. So we'll say, no, just Just come as you are. For some, that's a really important message. In our case here, so this is just an aside, if you will. So my mom often watches the services from Mount Forest, and I had an old pair of shoes that I was wearing for probably much longer than I should have been wearing, especially on a Sunday morning. And so the day I wore these new ones I got a few months back, she texted me and said, "Glad to see you wearing new shoes." But it's not about how spiritually I am, you know what I'm saying? What about this one? When we worship, sometimes people raise their hands, and some people don't, and that's okay. I got to tell you, there's been a whole journey for this on me. When I used to see people do that, I had never done that before, and to be quite honest, I thought it was weird. I'm not a big singer anyway, so singing was weird, but then to raise your hands at the same time was even weirder. And then I got to a point where I'd experienced it in a way that I really wanted to. Like for a long time, I wanted to raise my hands when I sang. I was just so moved by the song. Like we were singing earlier, I want to yield my spirit to you. Praise and awe and what I think as we sing these songs and what you've done just this week. Oh my goodness, I just want to raise my hands. But then I didn't for the longest time. Do you know why? Because I didn't want people to think I was weird. And now I just, whatever God brings, I do, and so be it. But I love being in a community where we say, it's not whether you're not better or worse. It's not about someone's closer to God or not if they raise their hands or if we pray out loud versus praying silently. That's what Jesus is getting at, I think, here. It's between you, me, and God. So let's dive into the first section, which is on giving. It's in your going deeper sections. It's in the bulletin in the middle, but it'll also be on the screen behind me. This starts at verse 2 through verse 4. Jesus says, so when you give, again, this is following verse 1 that says, don't do it, the spiritual life, it's not for show, that's not where your reward's going to come from. So then he gets into this giving idea. He says, so when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do. Hypocrites, another translation of hypocrites, actually, if you go back to the Greek, is actor. Interesting. Yeah. As the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Don't give for that reason. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Someone was telling me recently about a church in England that publishes everyone's givings. So I thought we'd take a vote today. Who would like? It's crazy, isn't it? I mean, I think where everyone falls, that would be really embarrassing and strange and just not right. If you give a lot, you would want people to know. If you wish you could give more, it just isn't. Couldn't help but think. I think where Jesus is going with this one, of a couple who I am just, we are just so blessed to know. This is a couple that they don't come to our church. They've been Christians all their life, and they are in their 80s. And they have a practice where every year what they do is they give $10,000 to an initiative that they really believe in. They've been doing it for years. And so we were blessed to receive from them a letter and a $10,000 check a couple years ago for the Journey Neighborhood Center. They'd heard about that. They believed in it. They'd actually, interesting enough, they had walked through that neighborhood for years and wondered when someone was going to do something. Interesting. But I went to thank them. And I went over for a cup of tea and had just an amazing conversation. And at the end I said, well, again, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your generosity. And I got to tell you, I really respect what you do, to take $10,000 every year and give it away to something you really believe in. And I swear, he'd been leaning back. He sat up on the edge of his seat, and he looked at me, and I wish I had this on video. His eyes popped out of his head, and this smile overtook his face, and he said this: "We love to give." Between you and God. I think that's what Jesus is talking about here. Jesus slides into prayer next. And it's interesting that this is the longest section of this passage. Not sure if that means anything or not, but it certainly is. This is where Jesus gives us the Lord's Prayer. Prayer is really important to the spiritual life. We'll talk about that in just a moment. For those of the Jewish descent at the time, the rabbis would have encouraged prayer as just central to the life of faith. But what was happening at the time was it was becoming an obligation. It was becoming a duty. It was becoming part of a checklist. It was becoming something that people were doing publicly for show, long poetic prayers that looked really impressive. And so Jesus counteracts that with these words on prayer, starting at verse 5. And when we get to the Lord's Prayer, maybe we'll say that part together. But let me read, starting at verse 5. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. The word is, they've received their reward in full. Like if that's all they're doing, standing on the street corners, doing it for show, Jesus said in all three of these, both giving, praying, and fasting, they've received their reward already. The word for that is like a transaction. The transaction is complete. A transaction isn't about a relationship. A relationship is much different, and that's where Jesus moves us to. It's not about show, rules, it's about a relationship. But when you pray, Jesus says, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you even ask him. This, then, is how you should pray. Let's say this part together. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. So Jesus not only says, here's how to pray, let it be between you and God, but here's a prayer you can use. The Lord's Prayer is just an amazing piece. It's worth breaking it down, but for today's purposes, let's just stay focused on the power of prayer and what Jesus is trying to invite those into, as well as us into today, when you think about prayer being between you and God. Prayer is very powerful. Here's a quote from a book I'm reading these days called Red Moon Rising. It's about 24/7 prayer. There's been this movement globally to have communities like ours work together with others to have people praying 24/7. And what's happening out of it is incredible mission and justice initiatives, but it all starts with prayer, because prayer is powerful. We tap into God and God's resources, and amazing things happen. Love this little quote from Karl Barth. To clasp the hands in prayer is the beginning of an uprising against the disorder of the world. I mean, we're not talking about something just for show. We're talking about something that's going to change the world, and we get to be a part of it. Prayer is powerful. Prayer is personal. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 6, which we just read, in the Message translation, Jesus says it's the same thing, but he says it a little differently. He says, when you go to pray, just come to God as simply and honestly as you can. It's a conversation. You don't need to pretend. Just come to God as simply and honestly as you can. And he says, and the focus will shift from you to God. And you'll begin to sense God's grace. That's what prayer does, when we get real with prayer and with God. This past week, I experienced that power of prayer in a personal way, in a very, well, let me tell you about it. On Tuesday, I was given an assignment to pick up our daughter Leah, who's 16, for her guitar lesson. The guitar lesson started at 4:30. I was to pick her up at 4:10. I was going to say no sooner, no later, but no, it was just no later, actually. I am known for not always being quite on time. I'm trying to be easy on myself here. So there was anxiety building already. Everybody wondering whether, is Jamie actually going to be on time for this? Honestly, friends, I was so determined to be on time. I called Leah that morning, early in the morning, and I said, Leah, I'm going to be there. In fact, I'm going to be there 5 minutes early just to show you that I can be on time for you and how important this is. Anyway, I left a meeting that I had at Steeles and Highway 10 to get to Mayfield. I thought I'd left lots of time, but I didn't leave enough time. There was construction and traffic. There was. So I got there 90 seconds late. 90 seconds late in my mind, but in Leah's mind, I'm 6.5 minutes late because I said I'd be 5 minutes early. No, it's big. It's important to this conversation. So we gently went at it for a little bit. I talked about the traffic, the construction, and how busy my day had been, how hard I tried. And then we just had a quiet ride to the guitar lesson. When we got home later on, I was still wrestling with this. And so I made a comment, something like this, as we stood around the very clean kitchen. I said, well, all I know is that I spent 45 minutes, and I probably said it kind of like that, 45 minutes driving to get a young lady to a 30-minute guitar lesson. In my mind, that puts me up for Dad of the Year. Well, no, yes, I mean, but yeah. I wish you were there when that happened. I love you. Anyway, the next morning, I started the day as I usually do. Put the coffee on, got my Bible out, my journal, and took some time to be with God. As I ran through, as I generally do, thank you, sorry, please as a way to guide my prayer time. Guess what happened when I got to sorry? God reminded me of a conversation and the way I was the day before. Honestly, guys, and without prayer, I suspect two things might have happened without this conversation with God that moved me in a different direction. One would have been, I may never even have paid attention to it. Flown right over top of it. The other, I actually might have got even more bitter and angry and let my ego and pride, which was what was part of what was going on there, get in the way of who I wanted to be and who God could help me be. So, it quickly becomes clear, as God and I are spending some time together, that I need to go and talk to Leah before this day gets any further. The voice of reason said, well, at least wait till she gets up. So as soon as I heard pitter-patter upstairs, I ran upstairs, and I said, Leah, I got to talk to you, please. I'm so sorry. Yesterday, the only real response that you need to hear and you should have heard from me was, I'm sorry for being late. I'm going to try to do a much better job next time. And I got to tell you, this whole thing about driving for 45 minutes for a 30-minute lesson, that wasn't me. I wish I could take those words back, and that's what I'm trying to do here. The truth is, every minute I get with you is the best minutes of my day. And we hugged, and away we went. God, through prayer, redirected my life and that relationship in a way that I'm just so very grateful for. Can't do that on my own. That's the power of prayer, of just being real with God. That part we can clap for. So, let's skip over fasting. Not because it's not important, but just for time's sake. The same message comes through when Jesus talks about fasting. Don't let it be for show. Let it be for your relationship with God, between you and God. Fasting, all joking aside, is a really powerful way to draw closer to God. And Jesus' message is the same. Let it be between you and God, not for show. I want to slide us into a couple questions here. First is, how is this relevant in the sense of how do we know if we're moving in the right direction on this stuff? How do we know if we're starting to get it right What are some things that we can look for that we really are living in a way, as Jesus encourages, upside down? It's crazy and it's different, but it's good, that says it's going to be between you and God, between me and God, and not for show. Well, here are some things maybe to think about. We begin to not care about who gets the credit. Do you know what I mean? I mean, we say that, but internally, like I'm talking, again, the kingdom of God is within. Luke 17, verse 21, that's what this is about. The kingdom of God, Jesus is saying, it's not just out there, it's also within. So what God does within us is really important. So can we live in a way that we really don't care who gets the credit? So my name doesn't need to be mentioned, even though I might have been involved. And we're not talking about not appreciating people. We want to appreciate people. That's natural, it's good. The more we can do and encourage, the better, absolutely. But in here, can we live in a way that we say, it doesn't matter to me. That's huge. That's what Jesus is talking about here. Remember that show, Romper Room? You guys remember? Yeah. And there was that piece at the beginning or the end, I don't remember, where they looked through the pretend mirror and they'd say, there was some kind of thing that she would say, and then she'd name names. And she'd say, I see Marina and I see Steve, and and I don't know if you watched this, but when I did, it was just like, oh, I hope they say my name. I mean, I don't know what happened when they didn't. There must be people who are going for counseling still because they didn't get their name, But can we live that way where I don't care who gets the credit, don't need to be named, it's okay, deep within. What about this? Lose the need to name drop. I'm just trying to get concrete here. How do we live this out? We've all been a part of conversations where when it's happening. My guess is we've all done it ourselves. I know I've done it, and after I've done it, I was like, I didn't need to do that. What was I thinking, and what was going on there? Can we live in a way that we lose the need to name drop? I did it back. Sometimes it can come back to bite you. I did it years ago. I was working with a group of youth, and I named Joe Theismann. So Joe Theismann was a quarterback for the Washington Redskins, and he had this huge accident at one time where in the middle of the game he broke his leg. It was brutal. And anyway, so I'm with this group of youth, and as I reflect, thinking back now, I remember this is what was going on to me. If I mention Joe Theismann, they'll think I'm cool because I know football, and I know Joe Theismann. I mean, I don't know Joe Theismann. I just happened to be watching on TV that night. So anyway, I mentioned it, and after I was done telling this story, everybody goes, who's Joe Theismann? One, I wasn't wise enough to know at the time, these weren't sports guys. They didn't have a clue nor a care who Joe Theismann was or about football, and they were way too young to know who Joe Theismann was. Sometimes it come back to haunt you. What about this? Can you do the right thing even if you know someone's going to be disappointed? Sometimes after prayer and discernment, we know what needs to be happening. In your spirit, it's like, this is the right thing. But it's going to disappoint somebody. Can you still do it? There might be other things that you're thinking about. What would encourage that as part of our reflecting out of today's time together? What are some of the signs for you that you're able to let it be between you and God, and maybe sometimes where it's not? And let God work on those and have some fun with them. Maybe an assignment for us out of today is to do that random act of kindness thing, to do something for someone or give something away where it's never going to come back to you, and just have some fun with it. Play around with this one if we could. Let me close the message time today with a question that I think is underneath all of this. And it's not in this passage, these words from Jesus directly, but I think it's underneath the whole thing. Why did the Pharisees feel the need for people to see them do these spiritual acts in a way that would make them look good? What is underneath that? From a human perspective even, I think it's this question. Where does your value come from? At the end of the day, where does your value come from? At the end of the day, why do I struggle with other people's opinions? In a way that, not to be not wise, like it's wise to know from a leadership perspective or decision perspective what people are thinking sometimes, but from a value perspective. Why does that paralyze me? Where does my value come from? I love Rick Warren. He says, other people's opinions of you are none of your business. Some of us are reading a book right now called Leading Me. And in this book, there's a chapter that talks about the cycle of grief versus the cycle of grace. And it is at the heart of this question, where does my value come from? The cycle of grief is this, that my value, my acceptance, how I feel about myself comes from my latest accomplishment or what others have said about me. So I do good, people say good things, I feel good. Cycle of grief. Cycle of grief because, well, you'll never please everybody. And what's enough? How much is enough? When is it good enough that I can feel accepted and valued? Cycle of grief. Cycle of grace, which is actually God's way, is very simple. And it's countercultural, upside down to the cycle of grief. The cycle of grace is simply this. I'm already accepted. I'm already valued. I'm already of great significance to God. That is my identity. And then I can go do whatever it is that God calls me to do. Completely different ways of living. Catch this. The Wednesday we read that chapter, I had this conversation with a guy named Eddie. Many of you know Eddie. Eddie comes from the Ardglen area, came through the Journey Neighborhood Center. We're so grateful to have Eddie as part of our church's life. One of the things that Eddie does is every Wednesday, Eddie transforms on his own the sanctuary from the way you see it right now to tables and chairs so we can have our Alpha dinner, Alpha experience. It's a great piece of ministry and service that Eddie does, and it's great. And one day, as he was doing that, I walked by and I popped my head into the sanctuary and said, Eddie, I just want to say thank you so much for doing this every week because it really matters, and just so glad you do it. And Eddie comes over to me and he says, oh, I know, you guys love me for doing this. I just read and talked about this chapter, cycle of grief versus cycle of grace. And so I said, Eddie, I just got to stop you. We don't love you because you do this. We just love you, period. We appreciate that you do this. See the difference? Now, let me close with two quotes and some prayer. One quote, I haven't read this book. I know nothing about this book, so I just want to confess, I just found this quote and I really kind of liked it in the book. The book is by a woman named Mandy Hale, and the title is The Single Woman, Life, Love, and a Dash of Sass. But I love this quote. Consider the fact that maybe, just maybe, beauty and worth aren't found in a makeup bottle or a salon fresh hairstyle or a fabulous outfit. Maybe our sparkle comes from somewhere deeper inside, somewhere so pure and authentic and real. It doesn't need gloss or polish or glitter to shine. Love that. Second one comes from the Bible. 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7. Samuel has been given an assignment to discern who the next king is to be. There are many who would cherish and be delighted to be invited into that role. And as God leads him, he challenges him on who he is looking for this role. It ends up leading him to David. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. This was one of the big looking. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So let's take a moment to try to experience and receive what we've been talking about here this morning, because it's powerful stuff. It's transforming stuff. It's upside down living kind of stuff. I want to offer through this time of prayer here 3 statements that are so very simple, but they're profoundly real. And may we hear them as God's words to us if we could today. The first is, I made you. The second is, I know you. And the third is, I love you. I made you. I know you. I love you. Let's just come to God and be still as we pray around those three powerful promises, realities, God's words to us here today. Oh God, we thank you. Thank you for your presence here in this space today. Thank you that you really do remind us all the time, if we have ears to hear. I made you. You made us unique. You're so creative. You made us different. You make us special. I made you. I know you. Lord, how amazing it is. The level, the intimacy, the depth with which you know us. You knew us before we were even born. How cool is that? You know our thoughts before we say them. You know our worries and our fears and those things that hold us back. You know the bad habits that no one else knows about that we wish we didn't have, and yet it's just sometimes part of who we are. You know what excites us. You know what we're passionate about. You know us sometimes even better than we know ourselves. Part of the power of being in a relationship with you is because of that reality. We get to know ourselves through you sometimes. I know you. I love you. Oh God, may we never lose the power of that statement. The promise of your love. You love us as your own because we are your own. You love us without condition. You don't love us because we accomplish things. You love us way before we even start. You loved us yesterday. You love us today. And you'll love us tomorrow. Oh God, we thank you again for your grace, for who you are, and for who we become as we entrust our life to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.